They didn't throw me a retirement party to celebrate my 35 years as a pediatric nurse. They threw it because they wanted my house. I realized this on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 months before I officially clocked out of the hospital for the last time. My son Jason and his wife Brooke had come over for dinner. I was at the stove stirring a pot of marinara when I heard the distinct snap of a metal measuring tape in the living room. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked out. Brooke was on her knees stretching the tape from the fireplace to the bay window. Jason was slouched on my floral sofa scrolling through his phone. 32 feet, Brooke murmured, jotting a number down in her phone. We can definitely fit the sectional here. I leaned against the doorframe. Planning to buy me new furniture, Brooke? She jumped slightly, the tape snapping back into its plastic casing. A tight, practiced smile stretched across her face. Oh, Loretta. No, just getting a feel for the space. You know, for when you downsize, this house is just too much for one person. She didn't ask if I was downsizing. She stated it as a fact. Jason didn't even look up from his screen. He just muttered, "Yeah, Mom. Stairs are going to get hard for you soon." I was 64, ran 3 miles every morning, and carried heavy bags of soil up those stairs without breathing hard. My husband, David, had passed away 5 years ago, leaving the 4-bedroom colonial fully paid off. It was my sanctuary. But in that moment, looking at my son and his wife, I saw exactly how they viewed me, a temporary placeholder for their future real estate. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just turned around and went back to my pasta sauce. But I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The measuring tape incident wasn't an isolated event. It was the beginning of a quiet campaign. 2 weeks later, Jason dropped his twin boys off at my house on a Saturday morning. No warning, just a quick honk in the driveway, and 2 8-year-olds rushing through my front door. "Brooke and I have a kitchen remodel consultation," Jason called out from the porch, already backing away toward his SUV. "We'll be back around 6. There's a list of their allergies on the counter. I looked at the crumpled piece of paper he'd shoved into my hand. It wasn't just allergies. It was a schedule. 10 a.m., educational screen time. 12 p.m., organic lunch. 2 p.m., quiet reading. I loved my grandsons, but I was not an employee. I spent the day with the boys teaching them how to plant tomatoes in the backyard instead of staring at screens. When Jason and Brooke finally returned at 7:30, an hour and a half late, they didn't apologize. Brooke immediately inspected the boys' clothes for dirt, her nose wrinkling. "I thought the schedule said quiet reading indoors, Loretta," she sighed. "They need structure. They need sunshine," I replied, handing Jason the boys' muddy sneakers. "And I need a phone call next time. My weekends are not open reservations." Jason blinked, surprised. Usually, I just nodded and kept the peace. "Come on, Mom. We're family. You're retiring soon anyway. You'll have all the time in the world." He chuckled, completely missing the ice in my tone. "My time is mine," I stated, closing the front door before they could push past me into the hallway. I watched through the peephole as they marched to their car, Brooke whispering angrily to Jason. I walked to the kitchen and threw their schedule in the trash. The expectation was crystal clear. I was supposed to fade into the background, a free babysitter and a future landlord. They were in for a surprise. The financial leaks had started subtly over the years. $1,000 here for a car repair, $500 there for a temporary tight spot. I had a joint checking account with Jason, a remnant from his college days that we never closed. I usually kept a few thousand in it for emergencies. On a Thursday morning, checking my bank app over coffee, I noticed a withdrawal for $2,000. The label read, Custom Blinds Depot. I picked up my phone and dialed Jason. He answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" "You withdrew $2,000 from the joint account," I noted. No anger, just a statement of fact. Silence stretched on the line for a second before he let out a nervous laugh. Oh, right. Sorry, I meant to text you. Brooke found these amazing blackout blinds for our master bedroom. We figured since we'll be moving eventually anyway, we should start upgrading our current place to sell. I'll pay you back when my bonus hits. Cancel the order, I instructed, taking a sip of my coffee. What, Mom, they're custom. I can't just… Then you'll need to pay for them from your own account, I replied evenly. I'm transferring the remaining balance to my personal savings and closing that joint account today. Are you serious? Jason's voice rose, panic bleeding through. It's just $2,000. You're sitting on a ton of equity and a pension. Why are you being so cheap? I'm being careful, I corrected him. I'll call the bank at noon. Make sure you transfer your own funds before then. I hung up before he could argue. I didn't wait for him to understand. 30 minutes later, I drove to the local bank branch and finalized the closure. The teller handed me the cashier's check for the remaining balance. I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. The ATM was officially out of order. Brooke didn't speak to me for 3 weeks after the bank account closed. Jason sent a few passive-aggressive texts about family supporting family, which I left on read. I used the quiet time to invite my niece Sarah over for lunch. Sarah was my late sister's daughter. She was 32, a public school teacher, and worked a second job on weekends tutoring just to afford her cramped one-bedroom apartment across town. Unlike my son, Sarah never asked for a dime. She showed up when I had the flu bringing homemade chicken soup and regularly helped me prune my rose bushes. We sat on the back patio eating chicken salad sandwiches. Sarah looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Rent went up again, she admitted quietly, tracing the rim of her iced tea glass. I might have to move further out, maybe an hour commute. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I thought about the 4 empty bedrooms in my house. I thought about Brooke measuring my living room for her sectional. Sarah. I began setting my sandwich down. How would you like to own a house? She froze, blinking in confusion. Aunt Loretta, I can barely afford groceries. I can't buy a house. I didn't say buy. I smiled. I said own. I laid out my plan. I didn't want to live in a massive empty house anymore, but I absolutely refused to hand it over to people who saw me as an obstacle. I wanted to downsize to a low-maintenance condo I'd found near the lake. Sarah listened, her eyes widening with every word. But Jason, she whispered, terrified of the conflict. Jason is an adult, I firmly replied. This is my property, bought with David's and my hard work. I want you to have it. You'll take over the property taxes and maintenance. It's yours. Tears spilled over her cheeks, but I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. No crying, I ordered gently. We have paperwork to do. A month before my official retirement date, Jason called. He sounded entirely different, upbeat, overly enthusiastic. Exactly the tone he used when he was trying to sell something. Mom, Brooke, and I were talking, and we want to throw you a massive retirement party. Catered food, friends, the whole works. You deserve it after 35 years. I held the phone away from my ear, staring at it for a second. The sudden pivot from cold shoulder to party planning was giving me whiplash. But I knew exactly what this was. It was a Trojan horse. They needed to butter me up. They needed me compliant and happy for whatever pitch they were preparing. That's very generous, Jason, I answered cautiously. We rented the banquet hall at the Lakeside Inn. He pushed on. Don't worry about a thing. Just give us a guest list. I gave him a list of 20 people, colleagues, my neighbors, and Sarah. Over the next few weeks, I quietly executed my own plans. I met with a title company. I signed the deed of my 4-bedroom colonial over to Sarah. The transfer was clean, quiet, and legally binding. There were no complex trusts or hidden clauses. I simply gave my house to my niece. I also signed a lease for my new condo and started moving my most cherished belongings into a storage unit, piece by piece. Whenever Brooke came over to check on me, she found the house exactly as it always was, completely oblivious to the fact that half my winter coats and all the family photo albums were already gone. She walked through the halls, running her hands over the banister with a possessive gleam in her eye. "This party is going to be perfect, Loretta." Brooke smirked, adjusting a picture frame on the mantel. "A real, fresh start for everyone." "Yes," I agreed, sipping my tea. "A very fresh start." The party at the Lakeside Inn was undeniably nice. Brooke had gone all out. There were silver balloons spelling out "Happy Retirement," a massive sheet cake, and a buffet line of roasted chicken and potatoes. The room buzzed with chatter as my old nursing friends swapped stories. I sat at the table of honor wearing a navy blue dress, accepting hugs and well wishes. Jason played the role of the devoted son perfectly. He gave a toast, holding up a glass of champagne. "To my mother, Loretta." He announced, his voice booming over the microphone. "A woman who spent her life caring for others and who now finally gets to rest. We love you, Mom. We are always here for you." The room erupted in applause. I raised my glass, meeting his eyes. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the smile of a man waiting for his investment to pay out. Sarah sat at a table near the back, watching the spectacle with a quiet, knowing expression. She gave me a tiny nod. The dinner wound down, and the guests began mingling near the dessert table. I remained seated, enjoying a slice of lemon cake. That's when they made their move. Jason and Brooke pulled up chairs on either side of me, effectively boxing me in. Brooke rested a manicured hand on my arm. "Did you like the party, Loretta?" she asked sweetly. "It was lovely, thank you," I replied, setting my fork down. I knew the pleasantries were over. The air shifted. Jason leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur. He looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "Mom," Jason began, clearing his throat. "Brooke and I were thinking, with you retiring, the house is just too much upkeep. We have a buyer lined up for our place. We think it's time we move into the Colonial. You can take the guest room downstairs." Brooke nodded eagerly, chiming in. "It makes perfect sense, Loretta. We'll handle the lawn care, the utilities. You won't have to worry about a thing. We'll just put our names on the deed so we can handle the tax deductions. You'll be surrounded by family." They weren't asking. They were informing me of my new living arrangements in my own home. I looked from Brooke's eager, calculating eyes to Jason's expectant face. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply picked up my napkin, wiped my mouth, and looked my son dead in the eye. "That won't be possible, Jason," I stated calmly. His brow furrowed. "Why not? The guest room has an ensuite bathroom. You'll have privacy." "Because," I replied, keeping my tone as casual as if discussing the weather, "I don't own the house anymore. I'd already given it away." Jason's face went completely white. All the blood drained from his cheeks in a matter of seconds. Brooke's jaw physically dropped. "You... what?" Jason stammered, the smooth salesman facade shattering instantly. "I transferred the deed 3 weeks ago," I clarified. "The new owner will be moving in on the 1st of the month." "Did you sell it?" Brooke hissed, her voice cracking. "Where is the money? We could use the equity to buy a bigger place together. I didn't sell it. I gifted it." I smiled slightly. "To Sarah. She needed a home, and I needed a smaller place. It's a done deal." Jason stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. "Sarah, you gave a $500,000 house to your niece. Are you out of your mind?" he yelled. A few heads turned at nearby tables. "Lower your voice," I commanded sharply. The authority in my tone made him snap his mouth shut. It was my house. Now it is Sarah's. Thank you for the cake. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out. 3 days later, Jason was panicking. My phone buzzed, constantly filled with frantic texts and voicemails. When I didn't answer, he resorted to calling my estate attorney, Mr. Harrison, desperate to find a loophole. I knew this because Mr. Harrison called me that afternoon while I was packing up my kitchen. Loretta, your son has called my office 4 times today. Mr. Harrison chuckled over the phone. He's demanding to see the paperwork claiming you weren't in your right mind. And what did you tell him? I asked, wrapping a coffee mug in newspaper. I told him the transfer is perfectly legal, irrevocable, and none of his business, Harrison replied. Just wanted to give you a heads up. He's very upset. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it, I said, ending the call. 10 minutes later, tires screeched in my driveway. I walked to the front door and opened it before they could even knock. Jason and Brooke stood on the porch, looking furious and disheveled. You can't do this, Brooke shrieked, pointing a finger at me. That was our house. We already told our realtor we were listing our place. You assumed, I corrected, blocking the doorway. I never promised you anything. Mom, you have to undo this. Jason pleaded, his anger giving way to desperation. We have debt. We were counting on this house to clear it and get ahead. You're ruining us. I looked at my son. A grown man fully capable of working standing on my porch, demanding I solve his mistakes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. I handed it to him. What is this? Jason frowned, looking at the numbers written on it. That is a total of all the loans I've given you over the last 10 years, I explained calmly. It comes to $42,000. If you want to talk about finances, we can start with a repayment plan for that. Jason stared at the paper in his hand, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Brooke snatched it from him, scanning the numbers, her face flushing a deep, angry red. This is ridiculous, Brooke snapped. Those were gifts. You're a mother, you're supposed to help your children. A mother raises a child to stand on his own 2 feet, I retorted. I am not a bank, and I am certainly not your retirement plan. Now I need something from you, Jason. I held out my hand, palm up. Your spare key, now. He hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, but he saw the absolute finality in my posture. I wasn't the quiet, compliant woman he was used to ignoring. Reluctantly, he reached into his pocket, detached the brass key from his ring, and dropped it into my palm. You're choosing Sarah over your own flesh and blood, Jason muttered bitterly. I'm choosing peace, I corrected him. And Sarah never expected me to die so she could get a free ride. I stepped back and firmly closed the door in their faces. I heard Brooke yelling at Jason in the driveway, blaming him for not securing the house sooner. Their car engines roared to life and they sped away. I locked the deadbolt and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the house felt truly quiet. Not a lonely quiet, but a clean, liberating silence. I spent the rest of the week finishing my packing. Sarah came over with some of her teacher friends to help me load the moving truck. When I handed Sarah the master set of keys, she hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. Take care of this place, I whispered, patting her back. I will, Aunt Loretta, she promised. I got into my sedan and drove toward the lake. It has been 6 months since I moved into my condo. It's on the ground floor, has a beautiful view of the water, and takes me exactly 30 minutes to clean. I wake up, drink my coffee on the patio, and watch the ducks. No measuring tapes, no unsolicited schedules, just peace. Jason didn't speak to me for the first 3 months. I didn't reach out either. I let the silence do the work. Eventually, he sent a short text on Thanksgiving wishing me a good holiday. I replied with a simple, "Thank you. You too." We aren't entirely estranged, but the dynamic has permanently shifted. He knows the bank is closed, and he knows I will not tolerate disrespect. When he calls now, which is rare, the conversations are brief and polite. Brooke hasn't spoken to me at all, which I consider a blessing. Sarah is thriving in the Colonial. She painted the front door a cheerful yellow and converted the formal dining room into a tutoring space for her students. She invites me over for dinner twice a month, and I get to sit in my old backyard enjoying the roses without the burden of maintaining them. Sometimes I think about that retirement party. I think about the balloons, the fake smiles, and the absolute certainty in Jason's eyes when he leaned in to claim what he thought was his. It would have been easy to cave. It would have been easy to surrender my space and my sanity just to keep the peace. But 64 years of living taught me one very important thing. True family doesn't measure your worth by what they can extract from you. I didn't need to fight them. I didn't need a courtroom or a dramatic screaming match. I just needed to pack my bags, hand over a piece of paper, and take back my key. And that was exactly what I did.